Welcome my channel. Tonight's story is one that history tried to bury, but the truth still whispers through time. We're traveling to Kentucky in 1851 to uncover the shocking case of Harriet, an enslaved woman whose suffering reached a breaking point and led to a brutal act of revenge against an overseer's bride. This isn't a rumor or folklore. It's pieced together from court fragments, plantation records, and first-hand accounts that took serious effort to uncover. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because bringing real, forgotten history like this to light takes an incredible amount of research and dedication. Harriet's early life under slavery was marked by relentless hardship, a reality all too familiar to those born into bondage in Kentucky during the early 19th century. From the moment she could walk, she was assigned to the most grueling tasks on the plantation, tending the fields in the sweltering heat, carrying heavy water buckets across uneven terrain, and performing the endless, back-breaking chores that kept the household and its surrounding lands running. Unlike some enslaved children who might have had slightly lighter duties, Harriet's master and overseer were notorious for their cruelty. Every minor mistake was met with punishment, and even when she performed perfectly, there was no mercy in their eyes. Fear and vigilance became her constant companions, shaping her daily existence in ways that were both exhausting and dehumanizing. Her interactions with the overseer, the man whose authority over her life was absolute, were particularly harrowing. He was known for his temper and his willingness to punish not just mistakes, but perceived slights or disobedience. Harriet lived under a system where every glance, every word, and every action could be scrutinized and twisted into a reason for retribution. The overseer's power was magnified by his wife, who often mirrored his cruelty with subtle psychological torment, condescending remarks, public humiliation, and threats that hung over the enslaved workers like a shadow. This constant tension created an environment in which Harriet's very survival required cunning, endurance, and an acute awareness of the dangers surrounding her. Beyond the physical labor, the emotional toll was severe. Harriet witnessed countless injustices. Family members sold away, friends punished, and other enslaved people subjected to horrors she could do nothing to prevent. She learned early on that showing weakness or emotion was dangerous. Any display of fear, sadness, or defiance could provoke the overseer's wrath. Yet, this oppressive environment also forged within her a remarkable resilience. She developed a keen understanding of human behavior, learning to anticipate the overseer's moods, to navigate the tense household dynamics, and to protect herself whenever possible. Every chore completed without incident was a temporary shield, a brief reprieve from the looming threat of violence. The plantation itself reinforced her sense of vulnerability. It was a sprawling estate, but no corner was safe. Fields stretched for miles under the overseer's watchful eye, and the main house stood as a constant symbol of power and control. Even in the slave quarters, which were meant to offer some shelter, the oppressive presence of authority could not be escaped. Whispers and rumors circulated among the enslaved workers about the overseer's violent outbursts, creating a culture of fear and caution. Harriet learned to move silently through her environment, to speak only when necessary, and to hide her true feelings and intentions behind a mask of obedience. Despite the oppression, Harriet retained a sharp mind and a strong will. She observed patterns in the overseer's behavior, noticing the inconsistencies, the small cracks in his arrogance, and the vulnerabilities in the household hierarchy. These observations would later play a crucial role in how she navigated the events leading up to the infamous act of revenge. Even in the darkest moments, her intelligence and awareness allowed her to survive, a survival strategy born not of privilege or choice, but of necessity. Her early experiences also instilled a deep sense of injustice. Harriet understood that her suffering, and that of those around her, was neither deserved nor fair. Yet it was relentless. Each day she endured was a reminder of the brutality of the system, and each act of humiliation she witnessed reinforced a simmering anger. This anger was not reckless but measured, a quiet force that would one day intersect with the pivotal moment of her life, the day she decided to act in response to the cruel circumstances imposed upon her. Ultimately, Harriet's early life under the overseer's control was defined by a mixture of fear, vigilance, endurance, and growing resentment. These experiences shaped her, honing her instincts and preparing her for the dramatic confrontation that would later make her story unforgettable. The cruelty she endured was not just a backdrop, but a catalyst, forcing her to navigate a world of oppression with intelligence, caution, and an unyielding drive to assert some measure of agency, however dangerous or fleeting it might have been. The event that finally pushed Harriet beyond fear and silence was a moment born of cumulative suffering, an incident that crystallized years of oppression into a single, unbearable point of breaking. It was a late afternoon in the spring of 1851, and the plantation was alive with preparations for the overseer's upcoming wedding. The air was thick with tension, as everyone, enslaved and free alike, moved under the weight of expectation and fear. Harriet had been tasked with tending to the kitchen and the storage rooms, ensuring that everything necessary for the ceremony and the reception would be in perfect order. Her hands were raw from scrubbing floors and preparing the endless dishes that marked her daily life. But she moved methodically, aware that even the smallest error could provoke punishment. The overseer's bride, young and inexperienced, entered the kitchen that day with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. Unlike her husband, she did not yet understand the strict hierarchy of the plantation or the intensity of control exerted over the enslaved workers. Yet, she quickly learned. She approached Harriet with a tone that was simultaneously sweet and sharp, offering instructions that seemed harmless on the surface, but were laced with impatience and mockery. Harriet felt the familiar, tightening knot of fear in her stomach. She had endured condescension and insult for years, but this day was different. There was a cruel gleam in the bride's eye, a desire to assert dominance over someone she already considered beneath her. The tipping point came when Harriet was instructed to fetch water from a nearby well for the final preparation of the wedding feast. The overseer's bride, growing impatient, deliberately demanded that Harriet carry the heavy pails faster than she safely could. Harriet, weary from hours of labor and exhaustion, struggled to comply. The bride's laughter echoed across the courtyard, sharp and taunting, drawing the attention of others. One of the younger enslaved girls, who had been watching in silence, whispered a warning, but Harriet could not retreat. She knew that refusal or failure would invite the overseer's wrath, punishment that could extend far beyond a mere beating. As Harriet reached the edge of the well, she lost her footing, the pails tilting and spilling water over the hard, packed earth. The overseer's bride screamed at her, berating her in front of the other workers. Every insult, every public humiliation, every gleeful remark was like fuel added to a slowly burning fire within Harriet. In that instant, Harriet felt the full weight of years of mistreatment, years of living under the constant threat of violence and degradation. Her fear, which had kept her compliant for so long, gave way to a raw, uncontrolled rage. But this was not a rash or thoughtless anger. It was the crystallization of endurance into determination. Harriet had observed patterns in the overseer's behavior, had noticed the way he reacted when challenged or embarrassed, and had learned the subtle ways in which the household's authority could be manipulated, if only one had the courage to act. That afternoon, in the shadow of the wedding preparations, she made a silent, irrevocable decision. She would no longer be the passive subject of cruelty, and she would act in a way that ensured the bride would feel, even briefly, the pain she had endured. The rest of the day unfolded with tension mounting. Harriet carried out her duties with deliberate care, every movement measured. The overseer and his bride remained oblivious to the storm gathering in the kitchen, in the pantry, and in the mind of the woman they thought they controlled. Yet the energy of the household had changed, a subtle but palpable shift that those who could sense it recognized. Harriet's anger had not erupted immediately. Instead, it simmered, controlled and focused, waiting for the precise moment when the opportunity would present itself. As evening approached, the wedding festivities began, drawing the plantation's social elite into the main hall. The bride, glowing with excitement and pride, believed the day had gone perfectly. Harriet, meanwhile, stayed in the background, silent and almost invisible, her presence unnoticed by those caught up in the celebration. But beneath that calm exterior, a plan had taken form. Every insult, every humiliation, every act of derision she had endured over the years converged into a single, potent resolve: this bride would experience the consequences of her arrogance. Harriet's mind, sharpened by survival, prepared for the moment that would mark the turning point in her life. A moment that would shock everyone and leave a legacy of fear and respect for her courage and fury. It is important to understand that Harriet's rage was not born of impulsivity. It was the product of years of observation, endurance, and the relentless accumulation of injustice. She had learned patience, timing, and strategy as tools for survival, and in this moment, they became instruments of revenge. What occurred that evening was not merely a crime of passion, but a calculated act, the result of a mind honed by suffering and the necessity of asserting agency in a world designed to strip her of it. The event that pushed Harriet beyond fear was, therefore, both the culmination of years of abuse and a testament to her intelligence and resilience. In that small kitchen, at the edge of a wedding celebration, she transformed her years of silent endurance into action, an action that would be remembered, feared, and whispered about long after the echoes of that day faded. This was the defining moment that shifted Harriet from victim to force, from silent endurance to active retribution, setting in motion the brutal events that history would later record. The wedding day that turned into a moment of horror began with a facade of celebration, a seemingly ordinary affair masking the tension that had been quietly building for years on the plantation. The morning started with preparations that were meant to impress the guests, the mansion polished, tables laid with the finest silverware, and servants scurrying to ensure that nothing appeared out of place. Harriet, who had spent the early hours preparing the kitchen and pantry, moved with a measured calm. Her hands, worn from years of labor, worked swiftly, but her mind was focused on the moment that would soon come. The moment when years of cruelty, humiliation, and silent suffering would erupt into something irreversible. The overseer's bride entered the day with all the naivety of someone unaware of the simmering resentment around her. She smiled, expecting admiration from the enslaved workers and nods of approval from her husband's peers, completely blind to the silent anger that lingered in the corners of the mansion. To her, this day was about pomp, celebration, and the assertion of social dominance. She had no understanding of Harriet's presence, no inkling that the woman whose life she had belittled and dismissed would become the instrument of a horror she could never anticipate. As the ceremony progressed, Harriet stayed in the background, blending into the shadows of the bustling household. She observed every detail, the movements of the overseer, the positioning of the guests, the pathways the bride would take between the main hall and the banquet. Her observations were not idle. She was calculating, timing her actions with precision. Every insult, every minor humiliation that she had endured in silence over the years was stored like fuel, ready to ignite. The day itself became a stage, and Harriet's plan, long formed and carefully considered, was the dark climax that the plantation had been unknowingly awaiting. The first guests began arriving, their laughter and chatter masking an undercurrent of tension that only the enslaved workers could sense. The bride, dressed in a gown meant to signify purity and status, paraded through the halls, giving orders and receiving thanks, oblivious to the storm building around her. She demanded attention and respect, flaunting the power she thought she had over Harriet and others like her. Each command she issued, each sharp word whispered to the servants, only solidified Harriet's resolve. By mid-afternoon, the gathering had reached its peak. The rooms were crowded, the air heavy with heat and the scent of food, and all eyes were focused on the bride and her groom, leaving the enslaved workers largely unseen and underestimated. It was then, at the moment when all focus was on the spectacle, that Harriet acted. She had planned the move meticulously, knowing that any misstep could result in immediate punishment or death. What happened was swift, shocking, and executed with a precision born of desperation and years of observation. Guests screamed, chaos erupted, and the sound of the bride's panic echoed through the halls. Those who witnessed the scene would later describe it in whispers, their voices trembling as they recounted the horror. The day meant for celebration became one forever marked by fear, blood, and the realization that Harriet had taken control in a way that no one had predicted. The aftermath of that moment was immediate and profound. The guests were frozen in terror, unsure how to respond to a woman they had long considered powerless. The overseer himself was left stunned, unable to reconcile the scene before him with the obedient worker he had controlled for so long. The plantation, normally a site of rigid order and hierarchy, erupted into disorder, the carefully maintained facade shattered by the act of one woman. Harriet, once invisible and voiceless, became the center of attention, her actions speaking louder than years of silent endurance ever could. This horrifying moment was not just an isolated incident, but a tipping point. It revealed the raw power that existed beneath the surface of oppression, a power forged through years of suffering and survival. The bride's horror, the guest's panic, and the overseer's disbelief all served as evidence of how completely Harriet had upended the expected order. In that instant, she transformed the wedding, a symbol of social status and control, into a tableau of chaos, demonstrating that even the most oppressed could enact consequences when pushed to the brink. Even after the immediate shock faded, the memory of that wedding day lingered. The incident became a whispered story among other enslaved workers, a tale of justice and revenge that inspired awe and fear. Plantation records, carefully maintained by those in power, attempted to minimize the events, but word spread too quickly, carried on frightened tongues and hidden glances. The horror of that day became inseparable from Harriet's name, cementing her place in history as a figure whose courage and wrath challenged the structures of cruelty around her. The wedding day, intended as a joyful celebration of union and social hierarchy, had instead become a symbol of resistance, horror, and the unexpected consequences of long, suppressed anger. Harriet's actions were deliberate, fueled by years of injustice, and executed with a precision that defied the assumptions of her oppressors. It was a stark reminder that cruelty, no matter how systematic or pervasive, could provoke a response powerful enough to upend the carefully constructed order of those who wielded power without conscience. The immediate aftermath of Harriet's act on that fateful wedding day was chaotic, terrifying, and, for those in power, utterly unmanageable. The carefully controlled environment of the plantation, which had always relied on rigid hierarchies and fear to maintain order, shattered in an instant. Guests screamed and scattered in all directions, some rushing toward the doors, while others froze in disbelief, unable to comprehend the speed and severity of what had just occurred. The overseer, whose authority had been absolute for so long, was left paralyzed by shock, his commanding presence rendered meaningless by a single act of defiance from a woman he had considered powerless. For the enslaved workers, the moment was terrifying and awe-inspiring at the same time, a sudden, undeniable demonstration that the balance of control they had been forced to endure could, in a single instant, be overturned. The plantation's immediate response was to contain the situation, but the chaos had already spread. Word of the violent and horrifying incident traveled quickly among the workers and even reached neighboring farms. The overseer and the master of the estate were desperate to reassert control and to minimize the fallout from what had occurred. They attempted to frame the event as an accident, insisting that the bride's injuries, if any were evident, were the result of a slip, a mishandled object, or some other misfortune entirely unconnected to Harriet. Yet the guests' panicked accounts made the truth impossible to obscure. The very speed and precision of Harriet's actions suggested intent, leaving no room for the excuse of coincidence or accident. Within the household, the mood became tense and oppressive. Every corner was scrutinized, every worker questioned, and every detail of the day examined in search of a scapegoat. The overseer demanded confessions, threatened further punishment, and enforced heightened surveillance. But Harriet's cunning and understanding of the plantation's routines allowed her to remain elusive. She had anticipated the chaos, had planned her escape routes and her moments of invisibility, and even amid the panic, she moved with a measured caution that kept her beyond the immediate reach of retaliation. Simultaneously, the overseer and his family attempted to erase any evidence that might point to Harriet's involvement. Records were rewritten. Statements were coerced from other enslaved workers, and the story of the day was carefully sanitized in the plantation ledger. Furniture was moved. Rooms were cleaned, and the remnants of the incident, however minimal, were hidden or destroyed. The master feared that the tale, if widely circulated, could damage the plantation's reputation and inspire other acts of defiance, so erasure became the primary strategy. To make it appear as though nothing had occurred, to return the household to a state of normalcy that could never truly exist again. Even with these efforts, the incident could not be entirely erased. Other enslaved workers whispered among themselves, sharing fragments of what they had seen and heard. Their accounts were carefully muted, passed in hushed tones, and shared only in safe spaces, but they ensured that Harriet's act lived on within the community. These whispers carried not just the story of the violent act, but also the larger truth of systemic cruelty and the lengths to which someone pushed beyond fear to reclaim a measure of power. In these private exchanges, Harriet became a figure of awe, a symbol that defiance was possible, and that even the most entrenched systems of oppression could be challenged. Outside the immediate confines of the plantation, word slowly spread, reaching neighboring plantations and towns. The story, though often distorted, fueled fear among other masters and overseers. It suggested that the enslaved were not as powerless as they appeared, and that vengeance could strike suddenly, without warning, and with devastating effect. The social order that had long relied on terror to maintain compliance was shaken, at least psychologically, by the knowledge that Harriet had acted decisively and successfully against someone in a position of privilege and authority. Harriet herself vanished from immediate notice during this period, her careful planning ensuring that she avoided direct retribution in the chaotic hours following the wedding. She remained a presence within the household, but moved with stealth and intelligence, aware that any misstep could invite punishment or death. Her ability to navigate the heightened scrutiny demonstrated both her cunning and her understanding of the delicate balance between visible resistance and covert survival. Every moment after her act was a negotiation, a test of her ability to maintain agency in a world designed to strip her of it. The plantation attempted to reassert control over its workers, but the psychological impact lingered. Those who had witnessed the events, even from a distance, carried the memory of Harriet's courage and fury. The overseer's wife recovered physically from the immediate effects, but the fear and trauma of that day left lasting impressions on all present. The household would never return to the pretense of normalcy, no matter how meticulously the records were altered or the rooms cleaned. Harriet's defiance had exposed the vulnerabilities of those who wielded power and had made an indelible mark on the social landscape of the plantation. Ultimately, the aftermath of Harriet's act was a mixture of attempted erasure, heightened fear, and enduring legend. The plantation's efforts to hide the truth could not fully suppress the story, and the whispers and recollections passed among the enslaved and even some outsiders ensured that Harriet's defiance would not be forgotten. Her actions transformed her from a silent, suffering worker into a symbol of resistance, a figure whose courage challenged the very structures designed to subjugate her. The horror of the wedding day became the catalyst for a narrative that would endure, a testament to the power of one individual to confront injustice, even under the most brutal conditions. Harriet's fate after the shocking events of the wedding day remained shrouded in mystery, leaving historians, researchers, and storytellers alike unsettled for generations. Unlike many incidents on plantations that were meticulously documented, her story became fragmented almost immediately, intentionally obscured by the very people who had sought to maintain control. Plantation records, letters, and local accounts were altered, destroyed, or withheld, leaving only a patchwork of testimony that hinted at the aftermath without ever fully revealing it. For Harriet herself, this meant she became a figure, both hunted and hidden, someone who existed in the margins of a world that had long denied her humanity, yet whose actions had forcibly reminded everyone of her presence and her power. After the immediate chaos, the overseer and his family reportedly intensified their efforts to track and punish her, but Harriet had already mastered the art of moving unseen. Years of survival under the plantation's oppressive hierarchy had sharpened her instincts, teaching her when to hide, when to speak, and when to act. Those skills allowed her to evade capture, though no one knows exactly where she went or how she survived in the weeks and months that followed. Some accounts suggest she was moved by sympathetic individuals, fellow enslaved workers who recognized her intelligence and courage and wanted to ensure her safety. Others speculate that she simply melted into the surrounding countryside, living off the land and relying on her wit to avoid recapture. Whatever her method, she managed to disappear from the immediate scrutiny of the overseer's household, leaving behind only the lingering shock of her actions. Yet, Harriet's disappearance did not erase the impact she had left on the community. Among the enslaved workers, her story quickly took on a mythic quality. She became a symbol of defiance, a reminder that even in the most brutal circumstances, a single person could act with intention and effect change. Mothers would whisper her name to their children as a cautionary tale, warning them to be both cautious and clever, to survive yet never surrender their sense of agency entirely. To the white families of the plantation, however, Harriet became a source of fear and obsession. They could not fully explain how one enslaved woman had so thoroughly disrupted the wedding day, nor how she had vanished so completely afterward. Her absence was as troubling as her act of violence, and it haunted the household for years, serving as a constant reminder of their own vulnerability. Historians who have tried to piece together her story face numerous challenges. Much of the surviving documentation comes from biased sources, overseers, magistrates, or families intent on downplaying her intelligence and framing her actions as inexplicable cruelty. Enslaved people's perspectives were often omitted entirely, leaving modern researchers to rely on fragmentary oral histories, scattered letters, and court documents that barely mention her. The discrepancies in these records only deepen the mystery, forcing historians to confront not just the specifics of Harriet's life, but the broader erasure of voices like hers in American history. Each new source raises as many questions as it answers. Where did Harriet go after that day? How did she survive in the years that followed? Did she ever live freely, or was she constantly on the run? What makes her story particularly unsettling is the duality of her legacy. On one hand, she is remembered as a figure of resilience, intelligence, and justice, someone who, in the face of relentless oppression, found a way to reclaim power, if only briefly. On the other hand, the violent and calculated nature of her revenge unsettles those who study it, challenging conventional narratives about passivity, resistance, and morality under slavery. Harriet's actions blur the line between survival and retribution, forcing modern audiences to grapple with the human consequences of systematic cruelty and the extraordinary measures someone might take when pushed to the brink. Even today, Harriet's story resonates with a chilling clarity. Local folklore in Kentucky preserves fragments of the tale, describing her as a woman who struck fear into those who underestimated her and who vanished as mysteriously as she appeared. Plantation sites, historical societies, and researchers continue to debate her ultimate fate, but the ambiguity only amplifies the power of her narrative. She remains a haunting figure, an enslaved woman who refused to remain invisible, who defied expectations, and whose courage and cunning leave a lingering unease for anyone who studies her story. Ultimately, Harriet's fate is unknowable in exact terms, yet the very uncertainty reinforces her enduring legacy. She is remembered not merely for the act of revenge itself, but for what that act represents: the capacity for agency, defiance, and intelligence under unimaginable oppression. Her story unsettles historians because it resists tidy explanations, refuses to fit neatly into moral judgments, and exposes the gaps and silences in the historical record. Harriet's life, her calculated defiance, and her mysterious disappearance remind us that even in the darkest corners of history, individuals can exert power in ways that ripple far beyond their immediate circumstances. Her tale is a testament to the complexity of human resilience and the terrifying consequences of cruelty left unchecked. Harriet's fate, though largely unknown, continues to provoke reflection, discussion, and unease, a story that challenges the observer to confront the realities of injustice, the unpredictability of revenge, and the enduring human capacity to fight back against systems designed to suppress it.